Welcome to today's podcast. Today we are going to talk about complex post-traumatic stress disorder from a Jungian perspective. So, from a Jungian perspective, what happens to the traumatized psyche? The psychological system created when a child is traumatized is life-saving but has a terrible downside. If the parents are causing the pain, a child cannot physically withdraw. Withdrawal have to take place on a psychological level because the child needs the parents to survive. Relational and creative potential hides in the unconscious. So another part of the psyche moves to the forefront in order to become its protector. And this protective system avoids everything that carries the risk of re-traumatisation. So the psyche of the child split, one part regress to a younger age and one part progress to an older age. Unfortunately, the protective system sees danger in every opportunity that can bring actually healing, fulfillment and meaning. So opportunities are sabotaged by traumatized children and people, and by creating a core belief, often in the hopelessness of our life. Core beliefs can be like, nothing is ever going to work out for me, I'm flawed, I'm unlovable, everything is my fault. And through this, a vicious inner critique develops. This traumatized psyche have certain secrets. What are these secrets? There is an escape into an inner world of fantasy, a trance or addictions. The self-care system that wants to protect the child from more traumatization provides false protection. It sabotages a life of meaning and of being in contact with your true essence. It is life-denying and self-traumatizing. The one part of the psyche become progressive, and that part turn into two subparts, an inner persecutor and an inner protector. This is according to the work of Donald Kalched. He is a Jungian analyst and has framed this concept, the self-care system. What is the work of the inner protector and the inner persecutor? The inner protector promises protection, but then also becomes an inner persecutor. Healing requires us to move beyond this inner persecutor protector into our own brokenness, to reconnect with our buried potential and to connect with the true original pain. Now, how does that all begin? Children that grow up in a good enough environment where parents satisfy their needs, parents are consistently available, and it's safe for the children to have needs and to communicate that needs, they develop as an integrated whole. As the child grows up, he or she learns how to protect him or herself in a healthy way. In cases of abuse and neglect or chronic invalidation, where the child's sense of self is repeatedly threatened, this healthy development is compromised. When children's sense of self is threatened and there is no good enough adult available to help metabolizing the pain, psychological trauma is experienced. An archetypal self-care system is constellated in the child's unconscious. And this can be compared with a psychological split in the child's unconscious. A normal reaction when emotional pain is experienced is to withdraw from the pain. Children are dependent on their caregivers and frequently does not have the option to physically withdraw. Therefore, a child's psyche is split, and the essence, the creative, relational, authentic, true self goes hiding deep in the unconscious. At the same time, another part of the child's psyche grows up prematurely. This part becomes the inner caretaker and protector of the hidden essence, and that it can also be called the regressed part. It also has to comply with outer requirements as best as it can. Now, the protecting part of the split, initially the split averts psychological annihilation. It saves that essential younger innocent child part in an encapsulated and protective state. The tragedy is that it leaves us dissociated from what is most vital and creative in us, as well as from experiencing, feeling daily experiences, really experiencing good and not good experiences. Emotionally painful experiences are not happening to the child's self because the essential self, the true self of the child is dissociated. What is dissociation of this essence? It's an unconscious process outside of the child's awareness. It is acting as a hardwired capacity in the human psyche. It acts like a circuit breaker installed in a house's electrical panel. Painful experiences are not felt. All that happens when there's anything that's painful, emotionally or physically, is that the circuit breaker just trips, and that is the defenses. The trauma become encoded in the body and the unconscious brain of the child. Now, what is children's belief system around psychological trauma? If a child had to dissociate a lot and painful experiences are not contained, explained and handled by caregivers or in therapy, a distorted interpretation of experiences are developed. Beliefs such as, I don't deserve to be loved for or cared for, there must be something wrong with me, everything is my fault, nothing will ever work out for me, is constellated. At the core of these beliefs are shame, and my definition of shame is my whole self is bad, and conviction of our own defectiveness. Often this is the explanation that was given to the child by the caregivers, either implicitly in the way they reacted towards the child, by, for example, ignoring the child when something bad happens, don't talk to the child for a few days, expecting the child to repair the rupture in the relationship, or explicitly, where the parents say to a child, you're the most horrible child that has ever been born, or I'm going to take you to a children's home, or something like that. Young children don't have any way the capacity to refute this, so it gives the self-care system an illusionary feeling of control. If it's my fault, I might be able to do something to change it. Self-blaming beliefs are actually protective, because it prevents the child from becoming angry and blaming the parents. The child cannot afford to do that because he needs a caregiver for survival. And it's also very painful to experience and admit on conscious level that your parents is not able to love you unconditionally. Anger that is then turned away from the parents or turned inward onto the child's own self. Thus, the psyche split again. There is now a critical inner protector and an inadequate inner child part, the regress part. This is a violent process, this splitting. It's like the splitting of an atom, and the result is therefore destructive and very toxic. The child developed a false shame-based identity, so the child's identity formation is not formed from being mirrored, being validated, being seen for his or her essence and who they really are. And that shame-based false identity becomes a filter through which the child's whole life is seen. The inner protector do all that it can to prevent the child from experiencing re-traumatisation. In order to achieve that, it acts as a tyrannical and violent inner persecutor. This inner persecutor inflicts more pain, trauma and abuse than the original trauma, because it keeps on telling the child inside, deep inside, that everything is your fault. And that constant blaming voice is more painful and traumatizing than the original trauma, and it never stops. The inner protector thinks that the excitement or hope presented by a new life opportunity is dangerous. So if there's anything that happens in the child's outside life that might help a child move forward and that might help a child develop more of their true self, then the inner protector's voice is activated, and that voice will tell the child, don't do that, it's going to be dangerous. Don't engage in that, you're not going to make it, it's not safe. So the inner protector acts also as a self-sabotager, and he does anything to sabotage an opportunity that actually can help the child to become healed and move forward. The inner protector turns against the very person it is supposed to be protecting to become an inner persecutor, and that is the words of Donald Kalched. The pain that this is causing is worse than the original trauma. How does the inner protector cause this self-sabotage? The self-sabotage is caused by a very critical self-persecutory voice. The voice will say anything to prevent the essential self from leaving its hiding place in the unconscious. The true self, the essential self, constantly get the message it's too dangerous to venture out in a world where you can be re-traumatized. And for example, you are unlovable and you will always be. Or you are so stupid, you have nothing to contribute. And these negative, demoralizing inner attacks lead to deep feelings of hopelessness, loneliness, despair, and desolation. Initially, there's a split between the hidden inner child, the regress part, and the protected persecutor part, the progress part in the psyche of the traumatized child. The actual traumatic experiences that happened on the outside world, like sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, and so forth, are dismembered. None of the emotions of these original experiences are felt after the self-care system is formed. The child sometimes also learns to dissociate and to move out of the body, not to feel the impact of what is happening. For example, a young child that is sexually abused. Once this happens, the child is not there where the painful events happen, and according to Kalched, they become a disembodied observer. The child often experiences feelings of being a zombie, so being totally numbed, and they will tell me in my therapeutic practice that they cannot feel, that they feel outside of their body and that they don't feel part of the world. So they feel that they are in a cut-off state of immobilization. Now, there are basically 3 ways in which the self-care system protects the child from experiencing the original pain of the trauma. The first one is by creating a trance state. So the trance covers the unbearable abyss of the unmediated traumatic experiences, according to Kalched. The inner persecutor protector can also create a fantasy life for the child, and we see that often in the playroom where children will tell a story about their life where that is not at all true, but that is the fantasy that they have created to escape from the unbearable pain of their real life story. So the inner imaginal world can provide a vibrant private space where the split of the self-care system can live safe and the child's essence is protected from reality. And in fairy tales, we can sometimes see how this fantasy play out. One of the well-known fairy tale stories that beautifully illustrates the self-care system of trauma is the story of Rapunzel. Rapunzel is imprisoned in the tower, and this represents the fantasy world where there's then a witch that carries the voice of the inner persecutor and the inner protector. So she needs to keep Rapunzel safe from the outside world by repeatedly telling her either you have to stay here, you will never make it in the outside world, the outside world is too dangerous, but also persecuting her when she wants to leave, when she wants to grow up, or when she has a need to connect with that true essence deep inside. Another fairy tale that is relevant here is the story of Peter Pan and the Neverland. The Neverland is creating the same fantasy world, have the same purpose. It's a magical world to retreat from unbearable, overwhelming trauma. There's also a third way for surviving the trauma, and that is where the self-care system arrange for a person to become involved in the world of addiction. This addiction becomes a replacement for real-life nourishment. And the danger of this is that these mind-altering substitutes like alcohol or booze or drugs create an experience of the pure spirit, but it's actually an illusion of very, very magnificent experiences. Meanwhile, the person's true functioning in the outside world becomes poorer and poorer, and the more the psyche is fed by one or other addiction, the less the person, child or adult or teenager, is able to function effectively in the real world. And we often see that in the therapy practice where teenagers that has been exposed to extreme trauma and instability from a very young age cannot function in the normal school system anymore, and they keep on retreating and just don't function well in normal outside life anymore. It can be asked, is it only severely traumatized people that have a self-care system? Now, not every person in the world, not every child in the world have suffered unbearable trauma, but we all have wounds. Everyone who grew up in a home where there was parents and that grow up had the message and got the message that some part of the true self was unacceptable. Often only some parts of yourself were allowed and were mirrored by your parents. And you can think for yourself for a moment which part of you that you are aware of have not been seen, mirrored, and validated. This persecutor-protector system is called in psychoanalysis a sadistic superego. So it is always creating extremely high expectations of a person. The energy of the self-care system is called to be archetypal. And what does that mean? It means that it lies deeply in the unconscious. It's not easily assimilated by the conscious mind, and the energy of that is very overpowering. It can actually be compared with a very high voltage. In order for this energy to be integrated on conscious level, it needs to be transformed through therapy and human relationship into manageable lower voltage doses. So one way in which this archetypal energy can be transformed is by human relationships. If there is no transformation, it will overwhelm the ego when triggered, and a person will become totally possessed by it. So how is this energy transformed through human relationships? The psyche personifies this energy and project it onto imaginary or real people. We see archetypes in fairy tales, myths, and stories and films. And the unconscious of a person projects archetypal energy also on humans, such as, for example, celebrities or politicians, and often that lead to either idealizing a person or diabolizing them. In our inner world, archetypes manifest in dreams, fantasies, and also sometimes through our inner voices. The energy of the self-care system is personified by an inner figure that acts either as an inner protector or an inner persecutor. And sometimes the voice or the message of the inner protector might feel like an angel or a wise old man or a friendly fairy or a good mother. Don't trust, don't go out of this tower, like the message that Rapunzel get, because it's unsafe outside. But sometimes this energy also become an inner persecutor, shaming and blaming and being hostile and violent. The self-care system is very deeply in the unconscious of a person, and therefore it's unintegrated, closed and rigid and shut off from human influence. It doesn't take into account that we can grow. So the innocent, the creative, the true essential self of the person is locked away for the so-called protection and to protect them against re-traumatisation. Actually, it is energy that is needed to grow into who we really are. This process in Jungian psychology is called individuation. But because of the trauma and because of the constellation of the self-care system, the energy is locked up for the purpose of survival. The energy is kept safe until we can find a way to mediate the pain that could not be felt initially when the trauma happened. Now, how does healing take place? So people who suffered severe trauma often have mystical and life-saving experiences of the numinous, and very often, and I see that with children too, they have a very rich inner life. So I can see that in the way in which a child builds stories in the sand tray, in which they make drawings, and how they connect with archetypes inside of them and with self-healing archetypes as well. The experience of the divine often connects with us in our brokenness, there where we are very hopeless and very broken. The work of therapy is to help us focus on our exiled parts, the parts that need to feel safe enough. These parts, we need to focus on that, and together with the therapist, to let go of rigid defenses. And the exiled parts, need to be seen, heard, and held with compassion. And this can lead to a sense of healing and wholeness. The experience of being a victim of trauma is created by the self-care system to give meaning to our pain. But this prevents the deeper original pain from surfacing. The story of the victim prevents the deeper part from being felt by creating a trance, a fantasy, or addictions. And then often a false sense of grief can be experienced as a result of this, because it is grief as a result of the self-care system and not the grief as a result of the true essence that cannot be felt and heard and lived. In order to be freed from this prison that the self-care system creates, we need to be awakened from the trance and the fantasy and reconnect with our true pain. This is the pain of the childhood psyche that was banned to the unconscious. And the reason for this was to manage the fear of annihilation. In the words of Donald Kalched, this is the pain of the lost heart of the self that was innocent and yet suffered terribly. These parts need to become safe to be felt on a conscious level, and then, and only then, true grief can take place. The grief of this innocent child part that could never live and be and have a voice need to be met with self-compassion and be held by a therapist. Whenever a person gets stuck in the victim role, it actually prevents us from taking responsibility for colluding, although it being unconscious, with the self-care system to cover up our wounds. And in a sense, that provides a false grief that prevents us from connecting with the unbearable wounds that were often inflicted on us as a very young child and by the developing self-care system, the inner persecutor and the inner protector. Self-compassion is a vital part of the process. The traumatizing self-care system was, in fact, often for many years, the only way to survive emotionally, and also the part that helped us to go on with life as normal, although there was all these trapped feelings inside. When we share these experiences in the presence of a therapist, it opens us to real love for our true self within. It helps us to being witnessed as where the true self could never be witnessed. There is not a quick fix for this. It can be a very timely process. The inner persecutor and the inner protector become very defensive when a client starts to care about the therapist, a therapeutic process. In other words, when our wounded child within starts to form a secure attachment with a real person. And often the self-care system will try to sabotage therapy and the therapeutic relationship by creating inner voices such as you cannot trust the therapist just do this for the money, the therapist is not real. And the reason why the inner persecutor protector wants to sabotage the process is to prevent re-traumatisation and to keep being in control of the inner world. If this inner persecutor protector succeed in sabotaging the therapeutic process and a process is quitted, this client is actually in a worse position because they is kept trapped in a repetitive self-re-traumatizing cycle of the inner persecutor and the inner protector, and that true self, the real essence, the flaming side, can never come conscious and become part of an authentic self. The journey towards healing from trauma and to connect and grieve the real wounds requires an enormous amount of courage and the ability to withstand anxiety. And a client need also experiences from other people around them where their essential part is seen, validated, and mirrored over a long period of time. I want to end off today by saying that it's necessary for us as therapists to take note of the dynamics of the self-care system and what that does to a traumatized client. On the one hand, acting as a persecutory protector, but on the other hand, keeping connection with the true essence for the client outside of conscious awareness. And we have a very responsible work in order to help a client to reconnect with their essence.